Chapter 13.
Behind his closed eyelids, Gary saw beautiful colors, bright lavender. The last light he had seen before darkness had closed around him, then floating circles of dark red and purple. Finally, with an effort, he managed to open his eyes. The others were awakening too. They sat on either side of Gary, neatly propped in a row, against one glassy wall of the room. Sa stood before them, hands on hips, regarding them with amusement. "I regret having inconvenienced you," he said. "But there was no point in wasting time. No harm has been done you. What in blazes happened?" The doctor snorted, shaking his head from side to side and then slapping himself to clear his head of cobwebs. Then he glanced sharply up at the lizard man as realization dawned. Sa nodded, smiling. "Yes, Dr. Shaw. I am speaking to you, and you to me. From now on, we can understand each other." "It was the chair?" Dr. Shaw asked softly. Sa nodded. "Yes. The inductor, as we called it, was our means of teaching complex and lengthy forms of communication. It implants information upon the cells of the brain's cortex so that an individual receives a whole area of knowledge instantaneously." "Sa," asked the doctor, "you mean that a person can learn an entire language by having those wires inserted in his brain?" "Yes. The information is programmed onto tiny disks. Our library has thousands of them. The appropriate memory disk is slip-fed into the inductor, electrodes are inserted into the proper areas of the brain, and the data is transmitted. Is this procedure unknown to your time?" Dr. Shaw rubbed his chin thoughtfully before replying. "Well, no. I'll admit our knowledge would be primitive by your standards, Sa, but we have begun to unravel the workings of the human brain." "Well," Sa replied, "we found it saved a great deal of time. All our children were given inductive education at an early age. They gained the benefit of centuries of knowledge in a brief time and could plunge onward to fresh discoveries." He went over to the chair and held up a tiny crystal disc. "Here is the entire memory course of our HOD language. It has been transmitted and implanted into each of your brains." "Then you mean," Laurie murmured, "we've each gotten the full course without knowing a thing about it?" "I regret that it was necessary to do it rather crudely," Sa told her. "But I did not wish to make those annoying scrawls on a piece of slate any longer. Rather than waste time in fruitless argument, I used the sleep wand." He held up the slender rod with a shrug. "A device we had for an occasional truant child who dodged his weekly visit to the library. My apologies." Sa pointed to the box attached to the chair. "That is the library. Inside are stored some 12,000 disks. They cover the entire range of Hagian knowledge. We were a small nation, but our curiosity was unbounded. Were it not for the final catastrophe, we would have soon overcome the obstacles of interplanetary flight." Dr. Shaw smiled rather smugly. "It looks like we humans beat you out on that one, my friend. Despite our primitive brains, we've sent vehicles past Mars and have landed on the Moon." Sa was visibly surprised by this. "Perhaps I have underestimated you. Forgive me. I have to remind myself that it is I who am from the long-dead past and that we now exist far in my future. I hope we can discuss these matters further. I am thirsty for knowledge." While this exchange was going on, Gary approached the chair and gingerly touched one of the cobweb-thin wire electrodes. "How did you stick this thing in our heads?" "The tip is microscopically fine," Sa explained. "You cannot actually see it. It is also tough as diamond. A high-frequency signal is sent through it and, when it is attached to the proper portion of the skull, this sound wave literally drills a minute tunnel through the flesh, bone, and chosen area of the brain, until it reaches the pre-selected memory cells. Then, the recorded data is transmitted along the wire for implanting. When the wire is removed, the whole is virtually non-existent, for it passes between the molecules which make up your tissue." Jordan groaned in mock anguish. "Boy, what a job of brainwashing you could do with one of these babies." Sa nodded his head in agreement. "Yes. The inductor has been used for that purpose too. You see, we did have enemies in my past existence. The Hod nation was no different in that respect from the nations of your time, as I have learned. In the beginning, we were all one, but then we split apart as our, perhaps, unfortunate thirst for knowledge led us far afield. There were those who wanted to reach the stars and those who wanted to leave things as they were. Some left the city to search for warmer or cooler or drier lands. And there were those who found it more to their taste to steal the fruits of another's labor. Later, when the giant beasts of the land and sea died in a great period of freezing weather, we no longer feared to roam across the marshes. It was then we discovered that other cities had sprung up, created by those of our people who had deserted Hod and struck out on their own. But when we came to the gate of their cities, these people turned us away with suspicion. Finally, they took to attacking one another, a great waste of precious time. But we could not foresee the coming deluge that would sweep all land life into one vast sea and drown the cities forever. And your city was trapped at the ocean bottom, Lorry said. Yes. But at least we were prepared. We had already constructed our sealed dome beneath the surface to better protect us from the poison gases in the Earth's atmosphere. It was a time of terrible change on Earth. Only Hod survived, because our city alone was dedicated to scientific pursuit rather than war. Our protective dome was made of synthetic diamond, far harder than any substance existing then. Or now, interposed the doctor. Tsar nodded and continued. We created it by rearranging the atomic structure of true diamond. These discoveries could, in time, have been turned into making the Earth a paradise, had not floods, volcanic upheavals, and poison gas made the Earth's surface a wasteland. Tsar shook his head sadly. What prevented your city from being destroyed by the earthquakes below the ocean floor? Jordan asked. Only chance, Tsar said. We spent many years of terror, cowering behind our dome. Once, the diamond shield did crack, but we repaired it before the water pressure could increase the damage. It was disease that finally brought us down. Tsar paused. But you're tired, he said. Come with me. He led his companions into a small antechamber that adjoined the teaching library and they sat down gratefully, on a long, low couch. Our recovery room, Tsar explained. Sometimes the inductor lessons proved tiring. Are you hungry? I'm starving, said Lorry bluntly. Tsar opened a small, square box on the table next to the couch, and drew out several pills. Concentrated dinners, he said with his strange smile. We are vegetarians, but I think you'll find these are palatable. He held out the pills. Green for seaweed, yellow for kea, a sort of vegetable stew. Both are highly nutritive. One will probably satisfy your hunger. And there is a decanter of fresh water on that other table. If you want more, place the decanter in that little niche in the wall. The base will connect with a tube that leads to a water tank elsewhere. Seawater is piped in from outside the city and automatically distilled. Tsar passed the food pills around. Lorry placed a yellow one on her tongue. She closed her lips gingerly, then her eyes widened with startled pleasure. Great, she murmured. Tell me something, Dr. Shaw asked. Are we really speaking Hod now, or are you speaking our language? They are one and the same now, Tsar replied. Your memory cells make instantaneous translation. One language sounds like the other. The food concentrates worked swiftly. The pangs of hunger subsided in a minute or two. It must be uncomfortably warm for you in here, Tsar remarked. The temperature we are used to is 90 degrees, somewhat higher than you prefer. Our people all wear this. He indicated the silken coverall that stretched smoothly over his entire body. It automatically compensates for temperature differences. I'm afraid I don't happen to have one small enough for the young lady at this moment, he added with his strange smile. Later, we will manufacture suitable garments for all of you. It doesn't matter, Dr. Shaw said. We'll have to return to the ship anyway. They'll be wondering where we are. We've been gone for over 3 hours. But there's so much to see here, said Gary. I hope we can come back again for a longer stay. Tsar smiled and nodded. We'll need to make more extensive arrangements, Dr. Shaw answered him. We should prepare for a full-scale expedition with proper clothing, recording equipment, additional food, He turned to Sa. Will you come back with us now? No. I prefer to remain in my city, the lizard man replied. Your decompression tank is hardly my idea of luxurious accommodations. I won't argue the point, Dr. Shaw laughed. I will show you how to operate the airlock and elevator controls, Sa did. I too will make preparations for your return. At that time, we can explore the underlevel. The what? Jordan stared at the lizard man. The underlevel, Sa repeated. Our facilities extend far beyond the area contained within the dome. The upper level of the city represents less than 5% of our construction and exploratory shafts. It will take weeks, perhaps months to fully travel HOD. He nodded at the doctor. Our people spent centuries beneath the ocean bottom. We had even developed the means for traveling within the molten core of the Earth. But, that's impossible. Dr. Shaw exclaimed. Then, seeing a sardonic glint in Sa's eyes, he muttered, well, maybe no. You'll have to forgive me, my friend. We've much to learn. Sa smiled his strange smile, and led them back to the towering elevator shaft. The control is simple, he said. Press that small stud and you will rise to the airlock. As you enter it, the automatic system will seal you from the city proper. You will find a red button on the left wall of the airlock. Push it to open the passage back to the tunnel shaft. It will reseal itself after you pass through. A similar button is on the outside wall for use in re-entering the city. I'll wait for you to come back, Sa said as they entered the elevator. A multiple alarm will ring throughout the city when you do. Goodbye for now. The crystal door slid shut as Dr. Shaw pressed the stud, and the elevator started upward to the dome. They emerged from darkness into the soft green glow of the ocean, and slowly rose to the surface, to the dark outline of the Cartwright above them. Moments later, they were being hauled aboard. About time, Professor Kincaid grumbled. You've been gone for 3 hours. We were afraid something had happened. But when Dr. Shaw began to explain what they had seen and done below, the professor listened hungrily. I'd give 10 years of my life to go back with you, he sighed. I know how you feel, Kincaid. But the next expedition will be even more exhausting. Besides, we need you here on the surface. The first thing we'd better see to is the Cartwright. Can it perform some routine operation in the vicinity? Close enough to stand by during our next dive, but not really concerned with our little expedition? I think so, answered Professor Kincaid. It makes good sense too. We can't keep our activities secret much longer without dredging up something to show the crew for all our diving operations. They finally decided that the ship would cruise a mile north with Professor Kincaid, gathering marine specimens, while the divers made their next trip to the sunken city. Can you contact the museum for authorization to stand by? Dr. Shaw asked Professor Kincaid. Don't worry, the professor replied. I'll make the arrangements. I'm supposed to be chief of topside protocol for this expedition anyway. Of course, the doctor murmured. By the way, he reached in his jacket pocket and drew out 2 small grey boxes. They resembled portable radios and were no longer than a pack of cigarettes. He handed one to Professor Kincaid and gave the other to Captain Lang. Signal monitors. We'll carry the transmitter with us on our trip. Whenever we're about to surface, we'll send out the signal. You'll hear a constant beep until you can bring the Cartwright around to our marker buoy and pick us up.